voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goët.
We're told he's tested often. But was he tested on Tuesday before he went to the debate? And then was he tested on Thursday morning before he went to New Jersey?
Yeah, I'm not going to give you a detailed readout with timestamps of every time the president's tested. He's tested regularly, and the first positive test he received was after his return from Bedminster.
Was he tested between Wednesday night and the time he went to New Jersey?
Again, not giving a detailed readout of his testing, but safe to say his first positive test was upon return, or at least after Bedminster, that trip. Thank you guys very much.
And that is how forthcoming the White House has been with information regarding the president's COVID-19 testing. We have no idea when he actually tested positive. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Monday, October 5th. With us, we have White House reporter for the Associated Press, Jonathan Lemire, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent and host of Way Too Early, Casey Hunt, former White House advisor for health policy and vice provost for global initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel is with us. He's an NBC News and MSNBC senior medical contributor. And Dr. Vin Gupta. He's a pulmonologist and an NBC News medical contributor. Good to have you all on board. The White House continues to provide limited and oftentimes contradictory information about President Trump's health. We learned yesterday that the president has been given dexamethasone, a steroid used to treat severely ill COVID-19 patients. Some health experts argue that's a red flag right there, because while the drug can reduce the risk of death for critically ill patients, it can cause harm to those with less severe symptoms. Dexamethasone is the third drug the president has taken since being hospitalized on Friday. He's also taken the antiviral drug remdesivir and an experimental antibiotic cocktail by Regeneron. White House physician Sean Conley said yesterday that the president has experienced 2 episodes where his oxygen saturation levels dipped. One of those instances was on Friday when the president was running a fever and was given supplemental oxygen. Speaking to reporters on Saturday, Dr. Conley repeatedly evaded questions about the president receiving oxygen. Yesterday, he tried to clear the matter up.
Has he ever been on supplemental oxygen?
Right now, he is not on oxygen.
I know you keep saying right now, but should we read into the fact that he had been previously?
Yesterday and today, he was not on oxygen.
So he has not been on it during his COVID treatment?
He's not on oxygen right now.
Over the course of his illness, the president has experienced 2 episodes of transient drops in his oxygen saturation. Thursday night into Friday morning, when I left the bedside, the president was doing well, with only mild symptoms, and his oxygen was in the high 90s. Late Friday morning, when I returned to the bedside, the president had a high fever, and his oxygen saturation was transiently dipping below 94%. Yesterday, there was another episode where he dropped down about 93%.
Irregularities in his lungs. Are there any obesities?
Until today, to disclose that the president had been administered oxygen?
It's a good question.
Thank you.
I was trying to reflect the upbeat attitude that the team, the president, that his course of illness has had. I didn't want to give any information that might steer the course of illness in another direction, and in doing so, it came off that we were trying to hide something, which wasn't necessarily true. And so here I have it. He is the fact of the matter is that he's doing really well.
Dr. Conley went on to say that the president could be discharged from the hospital as early as today if his condition permits.
So, Jonathan Lemire, you have been on ground zero of this story from the beginning and have been out at Walter Reed. We've been talking a good bit this weekend, trying to sort through, as all you reporters have been doing, trying to sort through exactly what's been going on. What we know Monday morning is this. The White House lied repeatedly about the president's condition on Friday. The White House doctors lied repeatedly about the president's condition on Saturday. The White House doctors admitted on Sunday, in fact, that they had lied about the president's condition on Saturday. And I think there was the suggestion that they did so not to upset their patient, which is their primary concern. But then even yesterday on Sunday, the number of incomplete answers, hedges regarding how low his oxygen level went, how often it was it in the 80s? How about the lung scans? What are these tests revealing? Do we have any assurance at all that anything these doctors are telling us about the president's condition is truthful?
Let's say this right up front, Joe. This is a national security threat, and the White House has a credibility crisis. There has been mixed messaging and non-answers and outright lies since Friday when the president was taken on Marine One from the White House to Walter Reed Medical Center. I was there, as you said, on Saturday when we pressed the doctors about whether or not the president had ever received supplemental oxygen. He dodged, he evaded, he was very cagey, Dr. Conley, sort of very almost cute in his answer, suggesting, well, he's not on it right now, or no, he wasn't on it yesterday, or he hasn't been on oxygen since this team was assembled. And then further reporting hours later revealed that indeed he had received supplemental oxygen at the White House on Friday before he was transported because his oxygen saturation level had dipped. We know that happened again on Saturday. His level also dipped. We also know that he has, as Mika said, is on this now powerful steroid, which is usually reserved for critical COVID cases and also used in tandem with oxygen. But yet we're still not getting straight answers in terms of exactly when the president may have received another dose of oxygen. Compounding the confusion, after that briefing on Saturday given by the doctors, within an hour, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows provided an entirely different accounting of the condition of the president, painting a much more sort of sober assessment, revealing that the president had been in a tougher spot Friday morning. Yesterday, we also saw again, though some more information was presented, other questions were dodged. The doctor did not get into whether the president had had a lung scan. The doctor did not suggest some evaded questions about what other treatments he may be receiving. He offered a very rosy timetable, suggesting that President Trump could go home as early as today, which flies in the face of what we had been told earlier over the weekend, that he was on a 5-day treatment of remdesivir and that it was highly unlikely that he would leave before then. So right now, the morning after the president got into a motorcade and did a brief tour of supporters outside Walter Reed Medical Center, when he stepped into an SUV with Secret Service agents who had to be clothed head to toe in protective gear, wearing face shields and masks, so the president could see his supporters. The president putting them in danger, being in an enclosed space, a COVID-19 patient with these agents, who of course are sworn to protect him. America wakes up Monday morning still not really knowing how the President of the United States is doing, and right now not believing that they can trust everything that the White House and the doctors are saying.
It is Monday, the 5th of October of 2020, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. Oh my, we've had a bit of some technical issues today. I was not certain if we could even pull off a show, and it looks like we may have to fill pad some of the show today, and I do apologize, with, well, other material, because we got a bit behind, and well, to be honest with you, we're starting to have a degradation of the machinery because they've been working like horses because they are workhorses. So let me get through with quickly about what we're going to attend to today in both the Bistro Cafe and the Chef's Table. Not so much of a rant. I don't know what to make of Trump's PR move while having the virus or not having the virus. Which is it? You can't Sharpie a virus, Donnie. You can't. And I guess the proof in the pudding is by how many people are now coming down with the virus. Okay. Wow. That's one way to get rid of some old people on the Supreme Court. Ram her through. Get her in those closed chambers. Goodbye. All right, enough of that rant. What's on the rest of the menu? Well, top aides and multiple high-ranking attorneys in his office accuse Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton of bribery and abusing office. New Jersey health officials have contacted more than 200 people who attended Trump's campaign fundraiser in Bedminster, but the CDC can't do it on the national level because of Trump's other campaign stops. Why is that? And 2 White House aides illegally investigated Voice of America White House Bureau Chief Steve Herman for anti-Trump bias? Please. After the break, we move to the Chef's Table, where over 100,000 anti-Lukashenko demonstrators in Belarus were undeterred by water cannons and tear gas. And tens of thousands of Israelis demonstrated at hundreds of locations across Israel against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And thank you to those of you who have sustained us for all these many years. Thank you. And if you, in these perilous times, who are not contributing on a monthly basis to allowing us to fulfill our civic duty, you could, if you're able to in these perilous times, if you could afford an espresso type coffee drink, the funds for that could be sent our way, and we will stretch those dollars on the quantum level. We leave no strange quark unstretched, and we pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue resisting as the founders originally intended. Oh, so many years ago. So thank you to those of you who have been able to do so, and thank you in advance to those of you who might consider helping us resist, because these are perilous times indeed. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. I, of course, take care of at Justice Putnam, and I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. Yes. And then I get that linked up on social media, and that's how you do it. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay. As I mentioned, we may have a longer Radio Labor International, maybe, to fulfill our hour, since I've been having some problems here. And hopefully we can get through this, well, newsread here in the salon. All right, let's get into this first offering. It is out of the Texas Statesman. Yeah, Texas Statesman. Let me find the poll down here. And it is, by Tony Plotsky and Chuck Lindell. This way. All right. Top aides of Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton have asked federal law enforcement authorities to investigate allegations of improper influence, abuse of office, bribery, and other crimes against the state's top lawyer. In a one-page letter to the state agency's Director of Human Resources, obtained Saturday by the American Statesman, which is obviously in Texas, and KVUE-TV, 7 executives in the upper tiers of the office said that they are seeking the investigation into Paxton in, quote, his official capacity as current Attorney General of Texas, end quote. The letter said that each has knowledge of facts relevant to these potential offenses and has provided statements concerning those facts to the appropriate law enforcement. Oh, indeed. Paxton, a 57-year-old Republican, was first elected in 2014. His office said in a statement on Saturday evening, the complaint filed against Attorney General Paxton was done to impede an ongoing investigation into criminal wrongdoing by public officials, including employees of this office. Making false claims is a very serious matter, and we plan to investigate this to the fullest extent of the law. And of course, the statement did not elaborate because they're just making threats. They're crooks. And that's how crooks make threats. The letter to Human Resources was signed by Paxton's first assistant, Jeff Mateer, who resigned on Friday, and Mateer's deputy, Ryan Bangert. It was also signed by James Blake Brickman, Lacey Mays, Darren McCarty, Mark Penley, and Ryan Vassar, who are deputy attorneys general, overseeing the divisions of policy, administration, civil litigation, criminal investigations, and legal counsel. Their decisions to report possible illegal activity involving their employer represents a stunning development in an agency that prizes loyalty, particularly from within Paxton's inner circle. It places a renewed spotlight on Paxton, who is already under indictment for securities fraud. Claire Dale of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. State health officials in New Jersey have contacted more than 200 people who have attended a campaign fundraiser at the Trump National Golf Course in Bedminster, hours before Trump announced he had COVID-19, as the officials try to contain the spread of the deadly virus. Somerset County officials were meanwhile contacting employees who worked the event, most of whom live in the county. In a joint statement issued yesterday, Sunday, the officials asked guests and employees to monitor their symptoms and if they were close to Trump or his staff, to quarantine for 14 days. The officials, who started seeking the information on Friday, said on Sunday that the White House had sent them a list of 206 guests. They declined to say when they had received the names. They were advising guests not to be tested for 5 to 7 days out from the event. While the risk is low, a negative test earlier than that time cannot definitively rule out that COVID-19 will not develop, the statement said. All of this makes it so very curious that county officials are doing contact tracing, but the White House prevents and forbids the CDC to do contact tracing for any of the events that occurred at the White House. David Folkenflik of NPR brings us a very infuriating last offering here on the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. Two political appointees at the federal agency that oversees the Voice of America recently investigated one of its most prominent journalists to make the case he was biased against Donald Trump. Oh, heaven forbid. NPR has learned the appointees compiled an extensive report deemed confidential on Voice of America White House Bureau Chief Steve Herman, claiming that in his reporting and tweets that Herman had been unfair to Trump and had broken the broadcaster's standards of social media policies. They repeatedly cited a conflict of interest based on their conclusions from Herman's social media postings, including his own tweets and his likes, according to materials reviewed by NPR. The findings were quietly presented to acting, the one that was installed by Trump, and all the other directors were kicked out. Voice of America director Ellis Biberaj for action 2 weeks ago. In so doing, the two men have violated laws and regulations intended to protect the federally funded news outlet from political interferences or influence. That has set off alarms within the Voice of America newsroom, already unnerved by investigations of coverage of Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden by Voice of America's Urdu language service and the tenor of language used to describe his wife Jill Biden to introduce a segment on VOA's French to Africa language service. NPR spoke to 3 people who had knowledge of the episode and another 5 for other elements of this story. It is not clear what Biberaj has done with the file. Herman, who declined comment for this story, is perhaps the most public face of Voice of America. He has been its bureau chief in India, South Korea, Thailand, as well as the network's senior diplomatic correspondent. Earlier this year, Herman drew the ire of Vice President Mike Pence's staff after revealing the vice president had not worn a mask inside the Mayo Clinic despite his office's awareness of the hospital's policy requiring it ahead of time. In other words, it's a vendetta because that's what crooks do. They issue vendettas. All right, let's get to our more elongated break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, nothing vast enters the life of mortals without a curse. I'd love to claim credit for that teaser, but in fact it belongs to Sophocles. When I first started thinking about what to say about the social dilemma, I had a conceit in mind, doing a review from the future, maybe from across an international border. I could adopt the demeanor of the Canadian radio voices in A Handmaid's Tale. But then it dawned that there's probably no such escape from what's at issue here, the degradation by social media of democratic values and the underpinnings of Western civilization, ironically by a democratization of access provided by technology that allows for no filters, reference points, or factual hierarchy. If using that conceit, I'd have probably said they were warned, whether by the wonky 2017 film Stare Into the Lights, My Pretties, or Douglas Rushkoff's theoretical volume Siberia, spelled beginning with a CY from the 90s, alarms were sounded. Now that they're flashing red, this doc brings together an assemblage of former tech executives and academics to connect the dots with which we're familiar, data mining, surveillance capitalism, etc., and especially how these mechanisms have come, as noted by Tristan Harris, formerly of Google, to turn the user into the product. How easily this technology has been adapted by those with motives past just financial gain seems to have come as a genuine shock to some of the interviewees, though perhaps it shouldn't have. The politics-money connection isn't new. A particularly effective touch in the social dilemma is an intertwined drama of a family dealing with a teenager's social media addiction between the interviews. Director Jeff Orlowski's last film dealt with climate change. It seems clear that he believes the tipping point on this issue is considerably more immediate. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Emily Schweng. Somewhere in this forest, you hear, there are sloths. Those sloths live in Brazil's Atlantic forest. If you're a tourist, watching sloths isn't that exciting. But if you're a scientist, well, it's also not that exciting. But there's a big upside.
And so they're actually a great study animal for the wild, because you can collect a lot of data on them.
Giles Duffield, a biologist at the University of Notre Dame, who studies circadian rhythms.
I mean, the ecology work that I used to do several years back in Bolivia was focused on bird conservation and bird ecology. And, you know, you'd see some parrots and you'd make some notes and then they were gone. You wouldn't see them again for another 24 hours.
But Duffield and colleagues now collect data on the brown-throated three-toed sloth in the Atlantic forest. Duffield says the sloths can stay in sight, or even in the same tree, for nearly 24 hours. The animals are at rest anywhere from 75 to 90% of the time. But they're coping with a damaged ecosystem.
The suggestion is 98% of that forest has been depleted. There's a lot of human disturbance. There's obviously roads cutting through these areas of the forest, and it means the population of fauna and flora is depleted.
According to new research published in the journal Mammalian Biology by Duffield and colleagues, sloths are responding to that habitat disturbance by altering their biological rhythms.
We started to see that the sloths were primarily day active, and that's counterintuitive from some of the literature on the species that we came across before. That suggested that they showed cathemeral activity, which is kind of neither day nor night, just kind of across the whole board. And in a few studies, it was predominantly nocturnal behavior. So this was kind of the opposite to what we'd expected.
Duffield says there are few, if any, studies where researchers monitored sloths over a full 24-hour period. This study did exactly that for 29 days.
Because a lot of the literature that we'd reviewed that associated with sloths had examined only a partial 24 hours. And so there were some inferences about their activity profiles over the course of the entire 24-hour period. So there was a bit of guesswork there.
Duffield believes that because predators in the Atlantic forest are extinct and sloths don't have to compete with other species for resources, they've simply taken on a daytime or diurnal schedule.
The light-dark cycle would be that primary cue, and that's what's kind of surprising, that an animal could be nocturnal under some conditions and diurnal under the other.
Other organisms may come along for the slow ride, from the algae that live on sloth's fur to the insects that live alongside the unhurried mammals. Duffield says it's not clear if the new schedule adopted by sloths in the Atlantic forests also affects these creatures.
And that's something we'd love to examine, whether, the local ecosystem and the associated organisms with the sloth, perhaps that changes. A lot of organisms can't readily change their day-to-night activity. Their survival strategies based on one or the other. And so it may well be that change or that association with daytime as opposed to nighttime or ephemerality does change some of the organisms that associate with it.
Duffield's most important piece of equipment for this research may be a comfortable chair. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Emily Schwing.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
The Trump administration versus the census.
I'm Tom Hartman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution requires the country to conduct a census every 10 years. The first census was conducted in 1790 under the direction of Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson and, as required, has occurred every 10 years since then. The census is critically important. It determines how seats in the House of Representatives are apportioned and how $1.5 trillion of federal funds will be distributed. But the Trump administration has attempted to compromise the census twice. First, in an effort to undercount immigrants by discouraging participation, the administration inserted a citizenship question. But the Supreme Court struck that question from the census because the administration could offer no legitimate reason whatsoever for including it. Second, the administration ordered the census to stop dead in its tracks by the end of September, even though the work, on account of COVID, is not done. Fortunately, a federal judge in California has issued a preliminary injunction in a nationwide lawsuit and ordered that the census information collection continue through October. Unfortunately, the Justice Department has announced that it will appeal, even though an inaccurate and under-inclusive census will undermine and plague the country's political system, economy, and civic life for a decade.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because democracy and advocacy begin with you, and freedom can't defend itself.
Shortly after taking office, Trump puffed himself up in full Trumpian pomposity to proclaim, "We will honor the American people with the truth and nothing else." Well, nothing else unless you count a record-shattering number of more than 20,000 documented lies he's uttered in only 3.5 years. He's now lying that a tsunami of voter fraud is about to hit our land and deny him re-election. Of course, as every investigation has concluded, the only widespread voter fraud in our country is the GOP fraud that voter fraud is rampant. But what's really at work here is that the Donald is in a cold panic about losing, so his only hope is to do two things. First, use the fraud bugaboo as an excuse to restrict voting in precincts that vote for Democrats. And second, delegitimize a Democratic win in advance by creating the myth that his loss could only be caused by hordes of illegal voters. Thus, he and his obsequious political party are actually spending untold millions of dollars in a disgraceful effort to try to keep American voters from casting ballots. Their tactics are worthy of the sleaziest of tin-pot dictators from the banana republics of old. For example, they've simply closed the neighborhood voting places in thousands of Democratic areas, and they've monkeyed with our nation's postal service in a crude effort to restrict mail-in voting. Then, William Barr, Trump's pathetic toady of an attorney general, even tried to boost the trickster's chances by ludicrously suggesting it might not be illegal for his backers to vote twice. This is Jim Hightower saying, so now, after promising he'd tell us nothing but the truth, Trump declared this year that he's entitled to re-election because, unlike so many who came before me, I keep my promises. Obviously, that's his fattest lie yet.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1945. That was a day known in Hollywood as Black Friday. After World War II, the movie industry began to rake in profits. But they did not pass those profits along to their employees. 10,000 members of the Conference of Studio Unions were on strike. They were part of the Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners. They were also in a jurisdictional battle with the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IATSE, over who should represent stage decorators. The strike wore on for half a year. The studios had more than 100 films backlogged and were able to wait out the strikers. But as the strike continued and the studios remained silent, pressure mounted. Despite the tensions between the two unions, thousands of IATSE members refused to cross the picket lines. On Black Friday, the strikers decided to concentrate their efforts at the Warner Brothers Studios gate. 300 picketers gathered to hold the line. Scabs, hired by Warner Brothers, tried to drive through the workers' picket lines to the studio. Variety accounted what happened next, writing, quote, "Strikers deployed from their barricades, halted non-strikers, and rolled 3 automobiles on their sides. By noon, reinforcements arrived from both sides. Firemen were called in to turn their hoses on the striking workers. Warner Brothers security deployed tear gas. Common for the time, accusations were hurled that the Conference of Studio Union strikers were communists. As a result of the strike, the Conference of Studio Union's employees were assigned to other jobs in the studios. When they refused, they were locked out. The union never recovered. The violence at the Warner Brothers Studios gate also helped to fuel the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act through Congress, which eroded union protections. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
I'm Mark Boulanger. In the report this week, Labour remembers the racist killing of little black girls in the United States. Education unions prepare for World Teachers' Day. The Labour Start report about union events and rapping.
Yo, I've been hearing a lot of trash talk about unions, saying these ain't the friends to be choosing, out for themselves, not for others.
This is Radio Labour. As the United States heads into an election while black people are being killed by out-of-control police, the country's labor federation, the AFL-CIO, is commemorating the killing of 4 little girls by the Ku Klux Klan 57 years ago this month. A bomb set by white supremacists killed the girls while they were praying at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. Richard Trumka, the AFL-CIO's president, spoke about the killings, racism in America, and racism in the labor movement itself.
On the day the Ku Klux Klan set off the bomb, parts of the labor movement were racially segregated, including in Birmingham. The divisions and hatred that landowners and employers had been sowing since the founding of this country infected our own movement. So when the AFL-CIO fought for the passage of the Civil Rights Act, we were fighting to end discrimination and racism, not just by employers, but by our own unions, our own institutions. We were fighting to change ourselves. We believe that people can change and grow and overcome so that history can be made right. We believe that people, and we the people, don't stay in the same place forever. We can be moved forward. After all, that's why it's called a movement. America's labor movement stands with every union member and every person in this country who is demanding justice and striving for the end of racism. Some refuse to learn. Some see what's happening and resist change or outright refuse it. Worse, Some want to return to the dark past that they mythologize as great. Well, we cannot let them drag us back and hold us down. At this very moment, we see things in our country that we don't like, and we demand change. Our nation is in a moment of true crisis, a crisis of public health, a crisis of economic justice, and a crisis of structural racism. And beneath all three of them is the question of who gets seen and who gets heard, and ultimately who lives and who dies. This is a crisis of leadership. The day after these 4 little girls were killed, President John F. Kennedy asked whether the bombing would finally awaken this entire nation to a realization of the folly of racial injustice and hatred and violence. Where is that voice today? Where was that voice in Charlottesville when the Nazis and white supremacists filled the streets? Where is that voice as thousands of our elders and essential workers, disproportionately people of color, are dying from coronavirus? Where is the voice of our nation's leader? At a time when we need unity, the president is using the power of the federal government to stoke violence and division. He's lying to us about the virus. He continues to block safety standards for our workers and health care for the unemployed. There's only one way to respond to such a catastrophic failure of leadership, and that's with solidarity. A rededication to this nation, to the democratic republic that is the United States of America. And that only happens with hope. Hope for our people, hope for our future, with certainty that a new day is coming for America. And it's coming because we're going to make it so.
As millions of children return to school, either virtually or in face-to-face classes, the world's teachers are now on the front lines as the pandemic continues its destructive path. That is why this year's World Teachers' Day, October 5th, is so important. Education International is organizing a global online teach-in so educators can share what they've learned so far and explore the problems they're facing. EI is the global union for teachers and other education workers. It has more than 32 million members in 178 countries. Susan Hopgood, a teacher from Australia, is EI's president.
Each year, we celebrate World Teachers' Day on October the 5th. But this year is unlike any other because we've spent it fighting one of the biggest pandemics in modern history. And if anyone was under the illusion that leadership does not matter, this crisis has proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that having the wrong people in power can mean a death sentence for many.
David Edwards, a teacher from the United States, is EI's General Secretary.
We are teachers. We learn and we teach. It's just what we do. And this October 5th, we are coming together for a global online teach-in to discuss the lessons of COVID-19, the lessons for us as a profession, and the lessons that we must teach the world. And there's so much we're learning.
Lily Eskelsen Garcia is the president of the National Education Association, the NEA, in the United States.
Schools provide much more than formal education. They're communities where students make friends, receive support and guidance from their teachers, and learn to live in society. They're spaces where parents can be confident their children are protected. In our schools, in our unions, and across societies, solidarity is the only way forward. It's all about being a team and beating this virus. We wear masks. We protect ourselves and each other. We work together.
Mary Boosted is the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union in the UK.
We're also learning that technology can never replace in-person teaching and learning. To the disappointment of EdTech profiteers, this crisis has clearly shown that technology can only be a tool of professional pedagogy, not a substitute.
Diane Woloschuk is an EI board member from Canada.
And we're learning that in a crisis, formal education and assessments come second. Our first duty is to make sure the basic needs of our students are met. We need to stay connected and give them a sense of normalcy, structure, and safety. We need to keep them learning without adding pressure. Standardized testing can wait.
Randy Weingarten is the president of the American Federation of Teachers, the AFT, in the United States.
Let's not forget, public opinion is a tool that can be turned against teachers or can be used in favor of public education. Opportunistic politicians are doing their very best right now to drive a wedge between teachers and parents in the reopening of schools. They're trying to cast legitimate concerns over health and safety as a roadblock to their plans to reopen schools at any cost. We need to be the champions of our kids, our educators, and our communities.
Marlis Chapa is from the GEW Education and Science Union in Germany.
We are learning that even free technology comes at a price. We often must pay for it with our privacy. Cameras in classroom are not acceptable. Allowing student data to become a currency is not an option. When platforms are offered for free, we need to read the fine print. We need to be vigilant and defend our students' privacy. And for many poor and vulnerable students, schools is the only safe place in their lives. It's here that many receive their only meal each day, where they are safe from violence or neglect in their homes, where they feel supported and cared for.
Magwena Maluleke is the General Secretary of the South African Democratic Teachers Union.
In this emergency, it all came down to us, what we could do with what we had. Our governments did not have a plan, but we rose to the challenge. The value of our professional autonomy has never been clearer.
Johanna Jara Astrand is an EI board member from Sweden.
We're also learning that decades of progress on women's rights and equality can be reversed in a matter of weeks. Even before the pandemic, women shouldered a lion's share of unpaid work in their homes. And now, with schools closed and elderly relatives at risk of infection, women have seen their workload increase exponentially.
Here again is Education International's General Secretary, David Edwards.
We must learn together. For the world to learn, teachers must take the lead. So on October 5th, World Teachers' Day, we are coming together from all corners of the world for the biggest global meeting of educators. We'll share our frontline lessons, hear from leading experts, strategize and organize to make sure the world that emerges from this crisis is better and more fair than before.
Here with his report about union events is Labour Start correspondent Derek Blackadder.
Each day, Labour Start's volunteers collect hundreds of news items about the struggles of workers and their unions from around the world in 36 languages. Here's a small sample of their work. Our top stories section included links to coverage of the strike against pandemic-inspired concessions at a Colombian coal mine, how unions in Azerbaijan and Armenia are cooperating to call on their governments to end the conflict between those two countries, and a brutal attack on a union leader in Guatemala. This week, the emerging trends in our news coverage include more signs that in much of the world, COVID-19 is not only into its second wave, but that governments and employers are attempting to press the advantages it gives them in undermining labor rights. Globally, the number of strikes by healthcare workers is high and continues to hold steady. In every case, the issue is COVID-19 related, either a shortage of personal protective equipment or a shortage of workers or even wage theft by employers. Wage theft is endemic with for-profit employers in the global south. Not just healthcare employers either, as the pending Mumbai airport walkout shows. Their workers have not been paid for months. Again, the pandemic is the excuse. On all of these themes, check out our Pandemic Union News page for details. For our Working Women pages, our volunteers found news of the working class content in Canada's Women's History Month, the pandemic-induced rise in sexual harassment in South African workplaces, and the growing #MeToo movement in the Danish media industry. The free health and safety newswire we offer in cooperation with Hazards magazine carried stories about how in a number of countries the privatization of the response to the pandemic is endangering the safety of healthcare workers as profits start to take precedence over people. We also covered the deaths of 2 food delivery workers in Australia and how women media workers in Pakistan are organizing against online harassment. Our current photo of the week is of an Iranian athlete and World Players member executed after a so-called confession he made after being tortured. Current campaigns that we are running at the request of unions around the world include an urgent appeal for online solidarity with Ukrainian miners who have taken to an underground occupation in an effort to win a safer workplace. Look for details of this and other campaigns on our site. This is Derek Blackadder from Labour Start, reporting for Radio Labour.
Now here is Luke Roderick with Solidarity.
Yo, I've been hearing a lot of trash talk about unions, saying these ain't the friends to be choosing, out for themselves, not for others. You might have heard unions ain't good for your health, brother. Well, let me spit it for you, got something to say. It's because of unions, we got an 8-hour work day. This ain't no commercial break, my friend. Unions are the peeps who brought you the weekend. Probably never think about it, la-di-da-di. Unions fought hard for your right to party. They're out there to ease your tension with decent wages, healthcare, and pensions. Now it's like unions blamed for bad weather. But tell me what's wrong with solidarity forever. I want to shout it on high, get it off my chest. The story here is fighting for those who have less. So when unions are bad guys in the propaganda war, think what they've done, where they stand, who they fight for.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table after that elongated break. I apologize, but we'll be better situated tomorrow because I'll have all of the tech issues figured out and corrected, so I do apologize for that. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 48 degrees Fahrenheit. We're expecting a high of 87. Mainly sunny, winds light and variable. Clear skies tonight. Lows in, they say, the low 50s. Winds will be light and variable. Mainly sunny tomorrow. High about 90. Winds light and variable. Confirmed coronavirus cases in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon is now at 1,229 with 6 confirmed deceased. Numbers subject to change because they'll be updating them later in the day. Ragweed pollen is moderate right outside the window here at the mothership in Rogue River proper. The air quality index in the region is good at 47 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is moderate at 4. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.13 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 96%. We are expecting rain later in the week. Let's hope. Weather from around the world is brought to you by People's Personal Weather Stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 63 and partly cloudy. Paris is 58 with rain. Rome is 70 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 67 and fair. Kabul is 66 and fair. Hong Kong is 77 with rain. Tokyo is 70 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 62 and mostly cloudy with wind. And San Francisco, California, don't forget the West Coast, is 51 with heavy fog. And New York is a crisp 63 degrees, fall weather, Fahrenheit fall weather, by the way, and sunny. And it's crisp. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Anonymous worker bees at the Associated Press bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. More than 100,000 people marched in Belarus's capital on Sunday yesterday to protest against the authoritarian leader who won his sixth term in office in an election widely seen as rigged. The demonstrators demanded the resignation of Alexander Lukashenko and freedom for political prisoners. Police used water cannons in an attempt to disperse the crowds, but the protesters remain undeterred. One video from the rally showed a group of protesters approaching a water cannon, opening a hatch on its side and removing pieces from inside the vehicle. Media reports say the water cannon malfunctioned after that and drove away.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Ariel Shallett of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tens of thousands of Israelis demonstrated in hundreds of locations across Israel against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, pressing ahead with their campaign against the Israeli leader after the government banned large centralized demonstrations as part of a new coronavirus lockdown. The protesters have been gathering outside Netanyahu's official residence in Jerusalem each week for over 3 months, demanding his resignation. After imposing a second nationwide lockdown to halt a raging coronavirus outbreak, the government last week passed a rule allowing people to protest only within 1 kilometer, which is about a half a mile, of their home. While Netanyahu has said the restrictions are driven by safety concerns, the protesters accuse him of tightening the lockdown to muzzle their movement. You know what movement in the United States hasn't resulted in any coronavirus outbreak? Yeah, Black Lives Matter protests. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcasting period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on. And we're going to meet up tomorrow, of course, for Terrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert dentelles et TTR, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.